Hey, here is a quick tutorial on working with some different sculpting tools within Maya. Now, typically we start modeling and we start moving things around using these primitives, poly models, and getting into sculpting is a way that you can kind of use a brush to kind of push and pull the geometry around to give you a little bit more customized look to your objects. So let's start off with, in order to sculpt, you need to have geometry already in your scene. So I'm going to start with something pretty simple like a plane. So I click on the plane and it pops up there. I'm going to use R and on my keyboard to reveal my scalable tool here. So I'm going to scale this up by dragging on that yellow box. Now I've scaled it up higher. I'm going to click off to the side. I see my plane here, but I also see this grid. And in this case, I don't want to see that grid, so I'm going to turn this off here. So now I'm left with my plane. When I click on it, I can see that it has all these subdivided lines within that geometry. Okay. So I'm going to go over here to my attribute editor and polyplane, and I can see that my subdivisions are set to 10 and 10. Now, something you need to know about working with these subdivisions is that when you sculpt an object, you sculpt geometry, it wants to bend and move at these points or at these lines where you have these different subdivisions. The more subdivisions you have, the smoother the geometry will sculpt for you. And so let me demonstrate that really quick. I'm going to go up here to my sculpting tool. I'm going to leave this as just 10 by 10. I'm going to go to sculpting, and I'm going to just use my regular sculpt tool here. Another way that you can access these and actually see the names for them, because sometimes these little symbols don't make a lot of sense to me. But you can go up to Mesh Tools and go down to Sculpting Tools, and these are in the same order from left to right that you see on that bar. And so these are the same tools here. So if you're ever curious as to what is the Smooth tool, what does that look like, the Relax tool, Grab tool, and so on. So let's start off with just a sculpt tool here. When I click on that, I see this kind of brush up here. Sometimes if you double click on this, not sometimes, but if you double click on this, you'll have another window pop up that shows the settings for that particular tool. So when I come over here, I see this little brush area, kind of familiar with that from Adobe software like Photoshop. But sometimes that brush does not always appear right away. And so what you have to do is hold B, as in Bravo, on your keyboard and middle mouse click. And when you do that, when you hold B and middle mouse click, I'm dragging while holding that middle mouse button down left and right. And so right makes the brush larger, left makes it smaller. So that will set your size for your brush. And when you do that, it changes up here as well. So you can see 2.772. If I shrink it down, 1.501. And it also has a strength associated with it, but for right now I'm going to leave that at 1. So I've got this selected and I'm ready to sculpt. So when I sculpt over this geometry, you see how it starts to bend. You see where it bends. It bends according to the geometry that's been formed here. So it's bending at these different vertices and edges that are created from these subdivisions. And so it makes for a very jagged, it's only going to get so, it's not going to get very curved, not very rounded edges if that's what you're going for, from geometry that looks like this. Now, something that you could do, close this out, I'm going to change the subdivisions on this object from 10s to, let's say, 50 I-50. You notice how now it kind of took that and translated it into something different. So I'm going to undo that, my steps that I just had done. And what I'll do instead, I'll come back to the higher subdivisions later. But what I want to do instead is preview one of these other tools here. There is a flatten tool. So if I click on that, the same kind of thing appears. The strength is a little bit higher, and you can adjust that as you need to. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to brush onto the geometry here and try to flatten this out. I'm going to crank that up, make it higher, and try to flatten this. Now, there's not much geometry here, so it's like trying to flatten something that's already flat. I can try a relax tool as well. And I know I'm on the relax tool because it shows it right here. I can try to brush over this, and you see how it tries to settle this all down. Oops, that's way too big for this geometry. And so it's very difficult when you're working in low polys like this to use a sculptural tool because there's just not a whole lot to actually sculpt. So let's get into geometry that is easily sculpted. So let's take this, I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to create a new object here, scale it up, but this time I'm going to make sure that before I start sculpting, I'm going to raise the number of subdivided areas on this plane. So now I have all these extra points to look at and to modify. So think about it like this. If I right click and go to vertex mode, all of these points are basically modifiable. You just don't see that when we're working with it in object mode. So I'm going to go into my sculpting, use my sculpting tool, size this down a bit. That's a bit much. And I'm going to brush around. Now look how much smoother that looks, right? And if I keep brushing over the same parts, it kind of builds it up and stretches it out more. And so you can imagine like this is someone, the terrain for an environment. And I'm just kind of building it up. Maybe I got some hills off in the distance, and that's kind of cool to see. And there's other ways that you can do that. Let's say I want to double click on this. This is my smooth tool. Now I can go back and extra smooth some of these. Now it's a really strong tool, so I can bring that back a little bit so it doesn't have as much of an effect. A little bit gentler touch there. Now over here, there's nothing to smooth, so it doesn't do anything. Now this is for relax tool. What I like to use this tool for is maybe I've gotten too ambitious, I guess, with some of my other tools. So I'm going to come back to this one in a second because I'm really going to try to mess up some of this geometry so you can see how that tool can be used. I like this one, I believe, is the grab tool. And what I could do with this is take it and click and drag it and move it around. So I'm going to take it and drag it. And then, oh man, this is getting kind of dirty right here. Like I've got folded geometry like on top of each other. It doesn't look good, and it's not going to render well because that geometry, when it's bent and folded like that, it won't render light or materials. And so what you want to be careful of is that you don't create spaces like that. And one way to do that is to use, I'm going to go back now to my relax tool and kind of brush over those areas. And what it starts to do is relax that geometry so it's not folded on top of itself so much. And it still pretty much keeps the basic shape of what I was going for. I don't really know what I was going for, but you kind of see how it fixed that problem of that geometry there. Maybe a little bit in here, but other than that, that works pretty good. So all of these tools have different ways that you can modify them. This is the pinch tool. So basically it's taking these different vertices and edges and kind of pinching them together. So you see how that's getting smaller. It's like it's taking it and like putting your two fingers on that side and squeezing them. Then I got the flatten tool, and I can start to flatten some of these back out. Let's say I got too aggressive with that. I'm just going to smash it back down. And hopefully it will solve some of those problems itself when it comes to that geometry. Otherwise, you have a tool that can fix it. And it'll take it back to its natural state, like that normal grid. There's a foamy tool. I'm not really sure. It's weird. I guess it bulges out on all sorts of different random areas. I don't even know what some of these are. Spray tool. You can like hold it and just spray down, and it's pretty aggressive. I'm gonna do that. See what it does when it's smaller. I can say, boom, instant mountain range, just like that. All these tools will do something. Repeat tool. There's an indent tool and or imprint tool, which is kind of interesting because you can go in and look at the stamps, and you can pick different stamps. And if you wanted a texture to be shown, you can choose a texture that you like. I kind of like this gravelly, pebbly thing. Say I was doing a beach area. That'd be kind of cool. So I'm going to choose that. That's the tool I want to use. That's my imprint. Double click on that so I can see, make sure that that is the one that I have. And I can stamp it into my background here. And I have invert selected. Not seeming to stamp for me here. Whoa. All right, so I click and drag on it, say that's what I want, and that's what came out of it. So let me dial that down a little bit. That seems pretty aggressive. Now, there's a lot of details in this. So now when I drag it out like that, it takes that imagery and tries to recreate it texture-wise here. So that's kind of cool. Works really good. I can also scale it down as well. Just different options that you have here. Wax tool. One that I find very useful is the freeze tool, actually, because let's say I like what this looks like, but I want to affect the outer area. So I'm going to brush around this, and I'm saying this is frozen now. Now I can go over here and I can sculpt. Look, I sculpt over it, nothing happens, but I can sculpt around it, right around the edges without any problems. So now I've created like this kind of pool, I guess. It's kind of area of water, maybe. It's kind of collected, kind of has like a water texture to it. So anyways, you can play around with this tool. It's very cool, very fun. You can even work with it with other objects. Let's say you had a cube, something like this. And this is not going to adapt well because it doesn't have very many subdivisions. So what I want to do is go and change that first. Let's say I want 50, 50, oops, not 150. Don't overdo it. There is such a thing as overdoing it. So be careful. But this will work on all objects. If you want something that's more rounded, or you want to get sculptural with your objects here, you can change and adapt and move these things around. There's also an imprint one in here as well, where you can push inwards rather than pulling outwards. So there's different things you can do here. Let's say I want to invert this smooth tool or the sculpting tool. Now it pushes it in. So you can really get into mushing this around like it's clay. A lot of fun. So almost turn that into a very fabric type of a material. Just different ideas that you can do, different things you can work with when modeling in Maya. So have fun with this. Remember about the use of your subdivisions and adding more geometry to your objects before you start to actually adapt them or and change them up. So have fun with this, and we'll see you next time.